I don't know if I said why. Anyway, obviously I'm interested in Bitcoin and blockchains and stuff, and probably got interested. Mike's actually the one who introduced me to all this stuff, and yeah, just been interested, especially in the technology. But actually, you know, just learning about all the aspects, right? The technology was like the hook, and now I'm learning about, like you mentioned, Venezuela and everything. It's like amazing the effect on the world that this sort of technology has. So, all right, so let me introduce our speaker. We have Colin Cantrell here, and basically I'll try to do a little intro. But Colin is obviously got into Bitcoin about 2013, and he was so interested, and he's really good. He's a really good software developer and everything, and he started looking into alternatives, sort of like how could one improve on Bitcoin and everything, and he's written his own new coin. So I'll let you know, without butchering your bio anymore, I'll let you continue from there. But everybody, let's welcome our speaker.
Well, hey, so I'm Colin Cantrell. A little bit about me is I've kind of been a software engineer since I was about 12 years old, so it's about 13, 14-ish years now. And I started in game development, kind of went into like doing my own physics algorithms, and then, you know, when I found out about Bitcoin, I just knew. You have that feeling like this is the future money. Speak up, sorry. This is the future money. This is how we're going to do the future. Everything we know, the core of the slavery that we all have these days is rooted in the monetary system. So one of the best ways that we can change the world is go to the root of all evil, which is money. But it doesn't have to be evil. We can actually make it something that's beneficial. So that's what I fed when I discovered Bitcoin. And it started, you know, did a little mining, started making some pools and everything like that. And then I started figuring out how to work the code. Satoshi's original code, and that's where I came up with Nexus. Now, it started in about 2014 as far as development came, and so it's been about 2.5 years now in growth. It started out as a very small idea, like, you know, hey, we got these difficulty issues, you know, the Bitcoin retargeting, there's, you know, inflation that can happen from that since it retargets every 2 weeks. Well, let's work on that. Okay, well, let's look at the quantum computing coming in now. Okay, well, cryptography can be decimated with SHA-2 when, you know, I mean, Bitcoin's based on that completely, the security of it. Where, I mean, quantum computers can crack it, and then when they crack it, then all the specialized mining hardware that people put millions of dollars into in the mining industry can go up overnight. Same with the private keys. It uses SECP 256K1, which is off of the Corbett script, which basically is 256, but there's something called Grover's algorithm, which I say is going to decimate the cryptography of it when quantum computers come out. So I started thinking about all these things. Well, what does Bitcoin need to take it into the future? What are our limitations, and how can we mitigate these limitations in order to make something that's going to really bring it to the future? But even more than that, how can we make new technology and prove it so that we can actually enhance Bitcoin? Because, I mean, the cost of doing experimental technology on Bitcoin, even on a testnet, you never really know what could happen until it goes out in the wild. So this is, in another way, proving new types of technology that can be backwards compatible and go into Bitcoin so that we can actually help Bitcoin as well as create new economies. So that's where Nexus kind of basically got started, and those are some of the fundamental ideals of it. It's like, let's make a new system. The system is fundamentally flawed. What do? Well, we kind of got to discard it and make a new one. So that's kind of where the basis of Nexus came in. And so I guess I can go in. Is everybody with me? Any questions so far?
Well, you say Bitcoin is flawed? Is that what you said?
Well, there's some flaws about it. There's some security flaws, and I mean, the cryptography is strong. You got the mining, but we have centralization. We have the Bitcoin developers, foundations. There's a lot of different things, and even, I mean, the transaction capacity. We got 1 megabyte blocks, and now there's a huge fee market. So there's a lot of things that can be improved on Bitcoin, but I think the development of it is inhibited in such a way because of its size and because of the cost of doing these new experimental technologies, like proof of stake. Oh, well, you know, if the security of that gets flawed, then there's going to be huge risks happening in Bitcoin, right? I mean, hey, we put this in and there's double spend attacks and it's going to harm the whole economy. So this is, in a sense, a cheaper way to prove new technology, as well as develop it and then be able to give it to Bitcoin. So any other questions before I move forward? Yes, sir.
I'm not even sure. Is this built on the Bitcoin blockchain or completely separate?
Oh, it's completely separate. It's its own. This is actually The reason I put this up, this is a log going on. This is what I look at generally every day. This is the actual Nexus blockchain processing on a server, seeing everything right here. Just had a proof of stake block coming. And so somebody has right here, they're staking, let's see, an average age of 36,000 seconds. They have 1.6% interest rate. It's because the interest rate, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But yes, it's its own separate blockchain with its own technology that's designed to bring the industry to the future. Any other questions before I move on? Get into some of the nitty-gritty details.
How long has it been available?
Since about the development started, I think about April 2014, and we launched September 23rd, 2014. So it's been available for purchase and live since September 2014. So yeah, close to almost 2.5. It's getting there. So it's still a baby, but you know, it's growing.
Was there a pre-mine?
There was no premium. So the way I have it is, I'll get to that in a little bit. It's self-funding, and you'll see that in some of these transactions. I can show you there, where instead of being like, okay, there's a large allotment given in the beginning, which also creates a corner on the market, if you know what I mean. It's a large percentage that's allotted before the supply is completely generated. And it's not given to other hands. There's two different types of development funding into there. There's actually the ambassador keys and there's developer keys, but we'll get to that in a second. Cool. Any other?
How many coins in Nexus?
Right now, I believe it's about 44 million. Let me get that number exactly for you right here.
I mean, is that the maximum?
No, the theoretical maximum, it's got a slight inflation. I'll get into that in a second. It's 45 million right now. The maximum for the supply generation is about 78 million for the initial supply, but then there's a slight inflation afterwards, so that allows us to have free transactions. It also slowly expands the economy, and it provides other benefits, like for miners to go indefinitely instead of driving up the fee market like we've already noticed for Bitcoin with the block. You know, the blocks get full, everybody's got to keep putting more and more and more into their fees to get their transactions processed. And I mean, they went up 80%, which I mean, who knows in 10 years, what if it costs $100 to send a Bitcoin? You know, especially when the miners go down. You never know. So I believe in like free transactions. That's one of the things. So that's why there's a slight inflation. Also with proof of stake. That's another story.
Where's the network?
Well, I just want to start. Sorry to cut you off. If you want to like, you know,
your presentation,
if your presentation is going to cover a lot of this.
No, it's cool. Questions are good. Yeah,
that's fine. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Any bankers interested?
Bankers?
Yeah.
I hope not. So, one of the main things that we're basically doing is providing real-world utility too. Right? I'll get into vector space systems in a little bit about creating a satellite mesh network in space to kind of like create a more hardware system for it, dedicated for blockchains, as well as like a database I've been developing and other things. But you know, Bitcoin has influenced the world in a very positive way, but a lot of these other alternative currencies that are out there, they're kind of sucking away from the Bitcoin economy. You know what I mean? Instead of providing value back into the Bitcoin economy. So that's one of our things that we're doing, is it should be mutually exclusive. Well, Nexus, as it grows and brings more people in, it could bring more people into Bitcoin. Like a lot of our community has come from first timers into crypto, and they come into Nexus first, and then they discover Bitcoin. And that's part of how the community has grown. We've grown it very organically, if you know what I mean.
So to summarize, it's a totally alternative coin,
yes,
but you are pro-Bitcoin. And you're hoping that by bringing people into the coin, they might also get interested in Bitcoin, and then also, if you develop a new technology for the coin, it should be compatible with Bitcoin and could be imported into Bitcoin.
Yeah, like one of the main, like here's an issue with Bitcoin. There's a 2-hour allowable clock drift, right? We all know that. Like it's usually, so they do a median time, which means, you know, all the nodes kind of, they equalize their time with each other, but I mean, not all clocks see the same. I mean, the quartz crystal in your processor, which is functioning by the piezoelectric effect, which means you apply a voltage to the crystal, it oscillates to a certain frequency. All of them are slightly different from one another, so every clock on a computer doesn't see the second the same on the hardware levels. So you need that allowable drift in order for the network to have a consensus, but that also opens some other opportunities for people to manipulate it. So one of the things that you can actually use Nexus for directly is the unified time system, which is an alternative to NTP. If you guys are familiar, it's called Network Time Protocol. It was developed in the 80s, but that has a lot of amplification attack vectors. It's got a lot of issues with it. The unified time system isn't quite as precise to the microsecond because we're using a Unix block timestamps are just to the second. So the Nexus clocks are all synchronized within 1 second of one another. And I'll show you, once we get it on the log, you'll see it adds samples from all the different nodes. They all talk to each other and say, hey, what's your time? Okay, well, I'm off by this number of seconds. And then you get the unified clock. And that also allows you to create time-based security. So like when the network launched, I released the binaries before the launch because I set a network time limit, which means there was no block that was able to be created before this time. So it was an exact precise. That goes into the distribution as well. And also the proof of stake system uses time-based security. So basically, if you have a consensus network like Bitcoin and you have allowable drift in that consensus, it's not going to be as accurate as it could be. And the more accurate you make, then you can build securities around it. So that's part of it. Now, anybody else have another?
You've got, there's also smart contract capabilities.
That's in the future, yeah. I'll show that architecture.
I remember talking about the timeline.
Instead of smart contracts is a new buzzword. I don't really personally believe in that. Like, I mean, and plus there's already so many great languages that have been developed so many times for a long time. Why don't we have a virtual machine that can basically create a true decentralized computer? Instead of Ethereum, how they kind of have every single node has to process a contract, you can create it where people opt in to process. So like, let's say you create a program on the outer level routing system that's going to be developed. It's kind of going in layers right now. But the inner layer is the ledger, but once the outer layer is done, it's going to have your own routes, its own DNS, and you'll be able to have your own decentralized programs that each computer opts in to process for. So it creates subnetworks on the main network so that it creates a true decentralized computer, and then the node count doesn't load the network down. It actually increases in capacity.
So that's, just to clarify, that's like future research.
That's future, yeah.
Okay.
It's coming in layers. Right now I'm working on the fundamental foundational layers, which is the lower level database, lower level protocol, getting the architecture built, and then it's kind of being built out in layers from that central foundation. But once we get through the main voting tiers, then you're going to have the decentralized computing. Because one thing that I've always said about is a problem with smart contracts is they're immutable, kind of. Like we already witnessed how they're not so immutable with the Ethereum Foundation, but that's another story. But I mean, we should have the authority as a group to choose what we want on our network. Now, if people start doing dark web activities and do some things that we may not agree with, like child porn or some of those weird things that you see on Tor, then why would we want to have that contributing to that dilemma? We should have the authority as people to choose that instead of an authority saying that they're like the FBI saying, oh, we're going to go shut down this network, or we're going to go shut down these servers. We should be able to say, hey, we don't like this route, we don't like what they're doing. Everybody puts it out to the network, they vote, and then it locks it out mathematically instead of having to go chase servers. So it allows us to regulate our environment ourselves. Yes, sir.
So how is the current processing being done? Do you have miners that are processing?
Yes. There's two different types of miners right now, yes. And there's also the staking system. I can get into that in more detail, but there's a CPU miners and there's GPU miners. Now each of these channels operate on their own difficulty. So here's the proof of stake. You see a block, and they actually reinforce each other too. Because right now Bitcoin can be 51% attacked if you have the mining hardware just SHA-2, right? You have all your ASIC rigs. Now Nexus requires resource input from 3. So here right now you can see this is a CPU block which is actually searching for dense prime clusters. So it actually has viability for number theory and number theorists. And so it's kind of a dual use proof of work. It gives you the validation and the proof that a certain amount of computing was done. There's unified time right there too. Just so it comes every second or every minute, so I just wanted to catch it while it's on. You see it's just adding samples, connecting, and it just goes through all the different nodes to add the samples. But so getting back to the CPU, right? They search for dense prime clusters, which validates transactions on the CPU chip. And it also gives viability for number theorists that want to study the prime density to prove some of these theorems about prime numbers. So it's kind of a dual use. The GPUs are just doing standard hashing. It's a different algorithm in SHA-2. I use two functions, Skein and Keccak, and it's 10 to 24-bit output. If you know what that means. Just think of it as 4 times the size of a Bitcoin hash as a Nexus hash. I'll show you guys that in a minute. You can actually see some of them a little bit shorter. over there. And Nexus hash is very, very long. Like here's a public key that's 1024 right there. You see that? So they're super, super long. But I mean, computers are getting faster and faster and faster. So 256 bit is the current standard, but to upgrade the cryptography network-wide, especially once you have a whole mining industry built around it, is not only expensive, but then it's counter to the people that invested their money. Like if SHA-2 finds collisions with Bitcoin, the whole mining industry could be decimated. I mean, and the whole cryptocurrency could be decimated as well. If there's weaknesses found in the keys, yeah, you can upgrade the keys, and they've mentioned that, Bitcoin developers, but the problem is, I mean, every single transaction previous to those new keys are going to be insecure. So you're going to have to go, and there are going to be network-wide floods of transactions trying to change the key and everything like that. But during that time period, that vulnerability can be exploited. So why not think ahead and utilize what is the highest standard in the industry right now, which we use 571-bit private keys, different than the 256-bit.
Now, this is really an amazing feat that you've accomplished here. And
thank you, sir.
Did you get funded, or how did you get it off?
Self-funding. I mean, I started it with a friend of mine, and he helped fund some of the development while I locked myself in a room for close to a year to just like let the code eat me alive, spit me out, and then like learn how it worked. And, like learn how Satoshi thought by reading his code and figure out what needed to be done. And then he kind of had some issues with business, so then I got a day job, and I just kept working, 9 to 5, so that I could keep funding it. And right now, that's basically what we're doing right now.
How did you find your miners?
What's that?
The miners. How did you find them? Or how,
well, I mean, we launched it on BitcoinTalk.org. We just opened a thread there. And miners got really interested in the technology. It was publicly developed from May to September. So people saw the kind of progression of how everything evolved, and you guys can see that as well. It's a kind of nice little history. You see like, oh, I discovered you can do this, and you discover you can do that, and like all these features just started flowing together, and I'm like, oh, well now I can do this, now I can do that, we can do this, we can do that, and it just kept building and building and building, and the miners just got a really strong interest in it. And actually the launch day was pretty hectic. We had a flood of miners, especially I told you it had the time lock, right? So everybody had their binaries out, everybody had their miners running, so it was like the most equal launch you could have possible for the people. They had a few hours to prepare themselves. So you'd be sitting there mining, getting all your blocks rejected. Once that time lock opened, it was a flood of blocks. It was crazy.
Yeah. Geographically, can you give me an idea, or all of us an idea of where the miners are worldwide?
See a lot of them in Australia, there's a lot of them in Europe, there's a lot in the US, there's some in Mexico, Canada. I mean, kind of like Bitcoin. I mean, we're not as big as Bitcoin, obviously, but
right.
it's pretty much around the world. And a lot of the other users that do Amazon droplets, so they're putting nodes all around the world for different relays. We got a lot of people in Indonesia. We got a Brazilian community, a lot of French people, Italians. I've actually been talking with some guys that are actually Ferrari innovators. Like they actually work for the innovation departments of Ferrari. It caught their attention too. So I mean, Italy. I've talked to a lot of people around the world. So I mean, it's kind of like a 24/7 job. Bringing new people in. Sometimes people are like, hey, let's try to catch you here, and you kind of got to be nocturnal some days. Other days you're on the day schedule, so it's like, it's really radical. But I mean, it's worldwide.
So in the last 2 years, how's it grown on Nexus in value?
In value? Let's see. It has grown, let's see, if you bought in the beginning of this year, we were about, I think, a $50,000 market cap. From the launch date, I mean, it was a $0 market cap. I mean, it started really small. We were traded, I think our low was 200 Satoshis, and it's just grown from there. So the gains have been, right now it's at about 1.4 million as far as growth. So it's been like from zero, just like Bitcoin was good. The first day, launch day, there was only 40,000 Nexus available to be mined. And that's all there was. So I mean, we started from zero and we grew. So over the last 2 years, it's been a growth rate from 0 to 1.4 million.
How many Nexus do you have to use to buy a pizza?
It's worth about 3 cents right now. So I mean, quite a bit. It'd be kind of like Laszlo. You know Laszlo? You guys familiar with his story? 10,000 Bitcoins. Probably, it'd probably be around there. 10,000 Nexus for a pizza. About $30, $300, I think, something like that. So maybe 5,000. 4,000, something like that. I mean, you do the math. I don't know the cost of pizzas here. We're not big enough, and there's not enough liquidity to have a lot of merchants, but the community is growing organic. It's not like we didn't one of the things that I always is, when we started the community was like, we're not here to hype, we're not here to be like, we're going to be better than Bitcoin, and we're not here to fight one another, we're here to cooperate. Because I always say cooperation is more beneficial than competition. If we all cooperate with one another, we can do 4 times what we could if we competed with them. So it's just growing very slowly, and I think with about 500 people in our Slack channel right now, we usually get 3, 4, 5 new people a day, just like it's picking up, it's growing. And then merchants follow. Once the market cap gets bigger and your volume gets higher, you get more liquidity, the more people start accepting it. And that's one of the things that we're working on in the partnership with Vector Space Systems, which I'll get into in the future. Later in this presentation, they're going to be accepting Nexus as far as the agreement we talked about for rocket launches, among other things.
In the last 2 years, what's the percentage in
2 years
that the value has gone up?
The value per Nexus? Okay, so it was on our first exchange, right? I think we didn't get on exchange for about 4 months. Since it's such a different technology, it's not like you can't just take a current exchange engine and make it work with Nexus, because we have so many different features, the upgraded cryptography, longer addresses, everything like that. So we were traded about 200 Satoshi about 3-4 months after, and now we're at about 3,500 to 4,000 Satoshi. So about 20-fold, I guess.
I like it because I'm able to mine it on my laptop.
Yeah, and that's the CPU channel. It's GPU resistant, but then it's also like, why are people going to make GPU rigs? Because they can just mine on the GPU channel. Yes, sir.
If I heard right, earlier you talked about the potential insecurity of the Bitcoin blockchain about SHA-2, 256, and quantum computing. Is this, I might have missed it, but how does this address that?
I'll show you. So, I guess I'll try
Is cryptography a lot tougher than that even?
Yeah, here, I'll drop it right over here so you can see. So here's a Bitcoin block hash, right? Right there, that's 256 bits. See, this is a Nexus block.
Got it.
Really, really long.
So, if I remember right, a Bitcoin address is quindecillion,
Quindecillion.
right? That's the amount of zeros, like for the potential probability. It's like versus the lottery. It's like in a lottery, it's like 1 in 252 million. Like for
256, 2 of a 256. It's a
that's
very, very large number. It's about
quindecillion, right?
100 digits, I believe.
Does that even have a name?
I can just say 308 digits. Just think about a number with 308 digits in decimal.
Yeah, Bitcoin is 15 sets of 3.
Yeah, something like that. So we are about 4 times that size, and that's another cool thing about the prime mining. Like I was saying, for the CPU mines, we are finding prime number constellations that are 308 digits long, which means they're world record-breaking prime number constellations, which then, they don't really have a definite, how should I say, proof that prime numbers go on indefinitely. They know that they get less and less and less dense, but we have no numbers to prove the validity, so we're doing them off of 308 digits, which is pretty much the largest you can do.
308 digits?
308.
So that's bigger than a Google.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I don't know the exact terminology. I just do it in like numbers.
Google's 100, if I remember right.
Oh, yeah. So it's very, very, very large numbers. And then we're finding constellations. Right now, the difficulty is 6. So that means we're finding 6 different prime numbers that are within 12 of each other. So like a twin prime is like 11 and 13, right? That's a little constellation. That's a small group because they're separated by number 2, but 11 and 13 are both prime numbers. So ours are separated by a maximum gap of 12, and you have to find 6 of them. And then the decimal difficulty is actually a proportion of the Fermat remainder. Fermat test is kind of a pseudo-primality test. It's modular arithmetic. I think it's p to the n-1 mod n equals 1. Something like that. And that says, okay, well, this is a pseudo-prime, but it passes the Fermat test. Now, if it's not 1, it's going to be some random large number, but I figured out that it's actually rarer to find numbers that are bigger remainders. So that basically that's how it scales through, like from 6, 6.1, 0.2, 0.3, is it has to find numbers with the last composite number, which is the +2, the remainder that's larger until it gets to 7, and then it has to find with 7 prime numbers, so on and so forth. So it's a smooth difficulty adjustment. It took me a long time to develop that algorithm. I sat there just like running test to figure it out. But like, I mean, it's the viability and, how should I say it, what it can do for the world, the number theory, and our understanding of mathematics, and these structures that form these large numbers, like prime numbers, are very, very interesting. The way you see them, they kind of form every single composite number. I don't know if you guys know, like this is something I figured out, is every composite number is divisible by a prime. It's not divisible by any composite number. So prime numbers are almost like the building blocks of numbers. And they're very, very interesting when you start understanding like Cunningham chains, bi-twin chains, prime constellations, dense prime clusters, besides just the prime numbers. So like, these are things that a lot of mathematicians have been trying to crack for a long time, including Little Hardywood. That's one of their theorems that we're helping to prove a few other ones. So the viability of it like has benefit, and that's part of the philosophy in providing utility and value in the outer industry, because I believe money is a container of value, right? I mean, it holds a value system, so when you put value into the outer world, it's going to reflect back the value of your economy. And it's going to not only get the psychological value, but it's going to be some people who are willing to pay that, because we are the ones that put our money or our sweat and blood into earning the money, or our money into buying mining hardware, to mint it. And the harder it gets, and the more effort you're doing to create it, which is, in a way, putting value into the currency. So, prime numbers is one of the ways of providing outer world utility. So, I'll show you, this is a Bitcoin private key right here. So that's what proves your ownership of Bitcoin, right? If you have this key, you guys all know that, I'm sure. You got to keep your key safe, that's what your wallet.dat file is holding. The Nexus private key is 571 bit. So you can see it's much, much, much larger. And it's multitudes of security higher than 256 because it doesn't go up linearly, it goes up exponentially as far as security and output, the number of bits security you have. So,
Doesn't
now,
that cause scalability issues?
what's that?
Doesn't that cause scalability issues?
It makes it slower, definitely, because it requires more processing to do the keys, but computers are getting faster. So, at that point, it's going to be viable. I mean, right now, it works, and it causes it to run a little bit slower, but as computers get faster and faster and faster, and we start realizing 256 bits is not going to do it, 571 is going to be what we're going to have to go, or they're going to go to 334, or they're going to move it up slowly, but we're already set there. So yeah, it could cause slight scalability issues as far as your processing required to verify your signatures. But on the other hand,
We're talking microseconds anyway, but
yeah, I mean,
I guess I meant like the blocks, right? Like if Bitcoin has a 1 megabyte block limit and they're using
It's larger,
56
yes.
bits, so you're going to have, your blocks are going to be more, your storage requirements are more, etc.
Yep, and that's part of like, I'll get into how the lower level database creates its own partitioning type of network. That's going to address that.
One of the things I remember you telling me in one of our previous meetings was that confirmation time was so much faster compared to Bitcoin or even Dash's Instant X.
Instant X is a little bit faster because that's doing transaction locking with the master nodes, which is a little bit different. But like, it generally takes about, I've seen about 1 minute for 6 confirmations, for 1 confirmation. Sometimes the speed is faster, you know, it varies because your difficulty is not going to set a specific time. It's a little bit random. That's why you have to have some sway in the difficulty algorithm. But right now, 2 minutes generally, I've seen 2 to 3 minutes for like 3 to 4 or 5 confirmations. But the transaction locking feature, I'll get into that on some of the architecture that I've developed.
Feature that's specifically for fast confirmations.
That's going to get, I'll explain how that's going to work in the future. Right now it's kind of like baseline, and I'm working the foundation of it. But once I get that foundation, then it's going to have node roles. We have transaction nodes that are all going to validate and vote on it, and they're going to have a trust, which is mathematically created, and their reputation on the network, I guess you can say. And based on the weight of certain trust, then you can say that this has transaction verified, right? And then the transaction nodes only need to hold the transaction data, and then the Merkle nodes are going to group those together and create by the hashes, right? Instead of including the transactions, that's also a security flaw too. It's called the Finian type, where I can send a transaction out, right? And I have a block with that transaction input already put in, but that back to myself, and we broadcast that block, and it blocks that transaction from ever being confirmed. Right? So the fact that a transaction can be included in a block without the network ever having seen it is actually a problem. And you really think about it, Why is it designed that way? It doesn't need to be designed that way. Every single node should know about the transaction before a block. And then you know if somebody's withholding a transaction to do an attack. So that's where like the architecture is going to grow. Right now it's basic, but the scalability is going to be organic when I finish the inner level voting system, the ledger system, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail later. Anything else before I move on? Yeah?
What do you think your main issues for going mainstream or the difficult?
Our issue specifically or crypto?
Hop shot.
The scalability. Blockchain is the first proven concept of a distributed network that allows us to make a currency, right? But blockchain really can't scale that far. I mean, yeah, we can reduce transaction size, or we can make the block time less, or we can increase the block size. Those are the three things that allow us to scale a blockchain, but really it's a flood network, which means like everything has to be flooded out to everything. So you're kind of limited by the number of nodes. The more nodes you have, it gives you more immutability from the network being taken offline, but it lags the whole network down, especially on the network level relay and everything else like that.
If blockchain is an issue, why are all the banks going into blockchain technology?
Because they're trying to follow the hype, and it's kind of the word. They're trying to like, it's kind of like, oh yeah, first they laugh at you. I mean, there's a website, I don't know if you guys have seen it, bitcoinsdead.com, and it's kind of a joke because it shows every single article that's been written by all the banks trying to say, oh, Bitcoin's dead. But now the economy rivals countries, right? So the banks are kind of like, well, you know, why don't we try to take these blockchains because they're a lot more efficient, but they're going to do it in a centralized form.
Right. Even Goldman Sachs released that paper that says that they can save like $6 billion a year doing blockchains.
Do you know banks? Okay, I don't know how technical all you guys are. They use Windows servers, and they're using architecture made in the 80s. All right, so the blockchain is obviously very significant advancement, but you know, if hardware requirements aren't a big deal for them, they have their own internal flood network. That's more efficient for a bank. But then you're going to have different banks with their different little blockchains. So, I mean, that's the scale fund because they don't have to deal with their own internal volume, right? And they can say zero confirmation saved transactions too because they're not going to have outer people. When it's centralized, it's easy to make it secure. But banks are severely outdated. And so they're trying to capture, in my opinion anyway, the blockchain. And they're trying to say, okay, well, everybody's into this blockchain. Everybody's seeing the innovation over the future. Oh, can't beat them? Now let's join them. Oh yeah, let's try to get these people. That don't realize it's the principle of the blockchain, not the architecture that makes Bitcoin what it is. The blockchain and the architecture just enables that principle to happen, if you know what I mean. And the principle is, fuck you things. Like, we don't need you. So it's like, what, you're going to make a blockchain? Yeah, you think I'm going to use your ass like that? Like, come on.
You said 256 is not going to do it. As in,
I didn't say it's not going to do it. I'm saying it's a problem potentially that if it's not looked at now, the cost of mitigating it, if it becomes, or when it becomes, I should say, a problem, is going to be
I get you. So let's say a quantum computer was here right now, today. Do you think, how quickly could a quantum computer scale up and crash 256? Whereas...
I couldn't tell you. Honestly, I haven't done enough research to be able to tell you.
Though, right?
What's that?
That's part of your fear why you're making this one.
It's not really a fear, it's kind of a precaution. Like, well, why not?
Yeah.
Right. It's like if anybody's going to attack Bitcoin security on any level, you're going to attack the most fundamental algorithm they built it. And if everybody's attacking that, and eventually, over time, the attacks become successful, then now that's compromised. Well, if everybody's, it's just like, you mentioned Windows, so I hate, I shouldn't say I hate.
We all hate Windows, man. All us tech guys, anyway.
Yeah, I like to bash Windows. I don't hate it.
We love it and we hate it.
But
well, we love to bash it.
You know, all the malware that comes out on the computing platforms is primarily directed at Windows. Why? Because 95% of the install base has that installed. So why waste your time with the rest of it? So that's probably, I mean, it makes sense. Like if you're going to attack a security,
big target.
Yeah.
So you attack the one and finally, we're not
well, and
using
think
it.
about it too. In the growth of the economy, that's like a positive and a negative. Now, if you get security flaws, upgrading the whole network. I mean, even now, it takes a long time to upgrade the Nexus network. If I have like a consensus update or whatever, like, or Bitcoin segregated witness. I mean, what? It's been like 2 months and it's not even like activated yet. I mean, it takes so many people and so many nodes. It's a big machine, and changing a part of a big machine on every single piece is very, very slow. You know what I mean? And the bigger Bitcoin gets, especially when it gets to that point where, let's say, 256 can be compromised. Think about how big Bitcoin's going to be then. Is it going to be easy or any simple feat to get everybody? I mean, most people don't even like to update the apps on their phone.
Ignorant question, could it be upgraded to a higher than 256-bit?
Bitcoin, yeah, it could. It can through a consensus update, but let's say it takes 5 months to do that update, right? And then finally validate that. Everybody's coins are going to have to be transferred out of their private key into a new private key that's more secure, so they're going to have a transaction to do that, which that window of time leaves serious attack vulnerability.
One of the things that attracted me to Nexus when I first started talking to Colin was, in my mind, the biggest limitation of Bitcoin is not really the security so much as the limitation of how many transactions per second we can do. And right now we're stuck at about 2.3. After segregated witness, we might have 5. Let's say they double the blockchain, that's 10. Well, Visa can do 8. They can do 8,000 normally, and they can go up to 20,000 per second.
At 50, I think.
It's 20. And then you have MasterCard, you have Discover, you have American Express. Well, in order to take over the world and create the reality I'd like to live in, we have to be able to have a technology that is able to handle 100,000 transactions a second. And that's when Colin told me that his system, because of the way he did the mining, is upgradable to that level. We can do 100
architecturally. That's the thing.
Yeah,
that's
it's built. It's built into
beyond
it.
Blockchain, right? I mean, blockchains work right now, but like they work only so far. They're never going to reach Visa capabilities. I mean, it's just as simple as a protocol message that Visa's running. You just set a packet.
Well, how much fraud occurs on Visa? I mean, the thing is, the difference between blockchain and traditional transaction processing is the security of it.
True.
So Visa is inherently insecure. Obviously, it's any cryptographic currency is a you as the holder of that cryptocurrency, it's a push-based system from your perspective. Nobody gets access to your financial resources unless you authorize it with your private key. The Visa system and the Master, all those systems are a pull-based system. They say, okay, well, they're requesting money, I'll send it, and then we'll deal with whatever fraud issues happen later. And that's what they do. It's a completely different way of thinking about it.
To amplify on that point too, this mag strip, right? It's ancient technology, right? Now you can get a reader and walk around and read everybody's credit card numbers if you want, right? Unless you have something like this, which is a Faraday cage, which you can't penetrate. That's just like nerd shit. But that's why they're doing these new stupid slow-ass chips. So that's another thing to add to it too. Like the inherent use of the card is flawed. Yeah. It's insecure. I mean, somebody can just walk right by you, steal your card right out of your wall without even having to touch it.
It happened to be in San Diego.
Exactly.
The Navajo County Police have a machine that does it specifically, and I'm sure many other counties. There's 3,000 counties in this country, and Navajo County is in the middle of freaking nowhere. There's no population center. I mean, there's a few small towns there, and they have the technology to be able to do this. They can steal gift card values like from a distance.
Yep.
Like if they suspect you of something or whatever, just the same way as police, if they find you with cash. There have been some stories like that. I remember reading one story where a restaurant owner had 20 grand of cash on them, and they were going to stock up on the supplies for their restaurant, and the police pulled them over, and they assumed that the money was drug money. They took the money. They never saw it again.
Exactly.
Now, the same thing can be done digitally with these gift cards, credit cards, even the chip cards, they can do it.
Yep. It's the moral of the story, get a metal wallet.
Yeah.
Nothing can be read, even with the remote ID readers.
Where did you buy yours?
This is just a cigarette holder. You can get them at Fry's Electronics.
So on Amazon.
I've seen them, yeah. Just get a metal wallet. I would really highly recommend it.
You can even use one of those metal mint
penetrate.
containers, even. I mean,
What's that?
One of those metal, like, mint tins.
Yeah.
Anything that's 360 degrees, yeah.
Well, so, and the other thing about the credit cards and stuff is if you've ever been a merchant, it's not like you actually have that money. So we talk about how fast these transactions are, but then it takes another couple days for the person trying to pay to actually get your money.
That's why it's funny.
So it's,
Right? Isn't that ironic too, where a lot of people say, oh, well, it takes an hour to send a Bitcoin. You'd be like, well, do you realize how long it takes for a transfer to clear? Or a wire?
Well, that's trust versus trustless.
But I mean, in some respects, like Bitcoin may be slow as far as getting confirmations, but like once it's confirmed, it's like a deposit into your account. All your transactions show up as pending. And I asked the bank once, I'm like, why did it show up as pending? And they say it's because we don't have the money yet. So it takes us a couple days to get the money from whoever you purchase, right? So I mean, the monetary system as we have it now is even slower than that. I mean, the pending transaction is almost like a zero confirmation Bitcoin transaction.
Right, just because you swipe your card and you get your Starbucks coffee right
That's
now,
a sign,
doesn't mean
like,
Starbucks has
I
the money.
will pay it, or Starbucks will get the money from your bank, but it takes a little bit for the money to travel through their wire. Windows servers for one.
Anyone scammed on eBay knows that.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
chargebacks.
Yep,
Oh, I never got that product.
exactly. Okay, so going forward, so now Bitcoin uses SHA-2, so we're using SHA-3. So NIST knew about quantum computing coming, right? NIST is like the National Institute for something standards of technology or something like that. Where they basically like, oh yeah, well this is a standard that we say is the standard and blah blah blah. But they held a SHA-3 competition, right? And I think that happened, what, 2014, 2015? Something like that. I think it was 2014. But the winner ultimately was Keccak, right? So that's the new SHA-3. So that's one of the functions we use, is Keccak. But I also use the second runner-up, which is Skein. Now Skein is called the weaving function as far as it hashes. Keccak's a sponge function, right? That's the way they work. So they operate very different from one another. So let's say in the distant future, Skein gets cracked and they find collisions in it. Well, we have Keccak too. We have two different algorithms which both would have to be cracked in order to reduce the security of a Nexus hash. So that's why it's called SK. So I created SK 1024, 512, 576, 256, 64, 32. And that's what I liked about Skein is Skein and Keccak were the only hashing functions that did a 1024-bit output.
Dumb question, but did the same thing happen with SHA-2 before an actual one was decided on? Was there multiple ones before the NSA actually
I couldn't
decided on?
tell you. I guess so, because SHA-1 is pretty much considered insecure now. There's enough collisions. They're all like, I mean, I've seen like, what is it, Symantec starting to get rid of the SHA-1 security certificates, and I'm just like, why are people using SHA-1? I mean, and I don't know if you guys know about RightMD 160, which is what Bitcoin uses for the actual hash for your address. That's already been proven to be insecure, but you know, I mean, it works because you got SHA-2 hash first of your key, and then you got the RightMD 160, which works. But I mean, like, why are we going to use an insecure hashing algorithm if we don't have to? So that's one of the things. So Bitcoin.
I can make one reference to the AES algorithm was one of the ones that there was a competition, and you know, there was the Blowfish algorithm that was there in competition, and it didn't make it, but. And there's a lot of speculation to say, well, did the NSA accept this AES algorithm because it had some kind of backdoor in it?
That's what they say a lot.
So
that's what the
So that was the winner.
I love the idea of using multiple hashes and the runner-ups and all that stuff because you're like hedging your bets automatically.
And I also say that about the private keys too. Some people have a conspiracy saying, oh, Bitcoin dodged a bullet using the Colbit's curve. And then other people say, well, the random curve is the one without the backdoor. Some say that Colbit's has a backdoor, some say random. We use the random over a binary field instead of a prime field, since, I mean, we're cracking into prime numbers. I mean, it's still granted uses a prime number in the algorithm, but over a binary field gives you increased security instead of using prime number-based security in that respect. So we use SECT 571R. That's our private key curve group, I guess you could say. What was that?
You mentioned that there's a security hole in Bitcoin, and I haven't heard of any security or thefts in Bitcoin other than in exchanges.
There's double spend attacks that happen.
There's a what?
There's double spend attacks. Now, the cost of an attack is very, very high, but like I was saying, a Finney attack is one, which was named after Hal Finney. He was the one that discovered the attack, which I described it. You send out a transaction, you already have a block hashed with your transaction, but the same input back to yourself in the block, so that if you do a zero confirmation transaction to, let's say, BitPay, you send your block right out, it's never confirmed because the inputs have already been spent, validated, and they're locked in with the database, right? Now, another type of attack is replaced by fee, right? Now, I think it was, I don't remember, I think it was Todd, whatever, one of the Bitcoin developers suggested that idea, which basically higher fee transactions with a higher transaction fee get accepted into a block in a higher priority, right? So you send out 2 transactions, but you just have a really low fee for the one to BitPay, and then you send out another one back to yourself with a higher fee, and out. It's one that's going to get on the block.
If there's a big growing memory pool, right? It's that whatever you call it, memory.
Yeah, memory
So
pool.
the memory pool is 5,000, 60,000.
Well, it does, but I mean, if you send it out, let's say at 2 different points, I mean, the memory pool checks the inputs. You can have, so like half the network will say yay on this transaction, half the network will say nay on that transaction. And then, you know, whatever miner grabs it, grabs it. Well,
So does that mean there's a double payout to the one that's sending out the purchase?
yeah, so like the way you do a double spend attack is, let's say I'd send, you know, to an exchange, right? I'd send and then I'd send it back to myself so that I'd keep the coins and then I liquidate whatever and then I got double the amount. And you're kind of stealing from everybody in the exchange, or, you know, I mean, for goods and services it's a little less because, you know, they can say, oh, well, this was never confirmed so we're not going to ship it out to you or something like that. But, you know, I mean, the exchange attacks are like the general, like, most effective ways to do it. And one of the reasons that flaw is in place is because there's like, what's the backlog right now? 40,000 transactions in Bitcoin? Something like that. Oh, there's a big backlog right now. So, I mean, if you really think about it, like everybody accepts zero confirmation transactions because they're willing to take the risk to provide a good merchant experience.
GIF used to accept zero confirmation transactions. I used to be able to go into Home Depot, you know, fill my cart worth of stuff, $500 worth of stuff or whatever, and then on my way to the register, buy the Home Depot card through gift, GYFT gift.
And they did zero confirmation.
And I would be able to spend it immediately. Same thing with Amazon and everything else. They do not allow that zero confirmation transactions anymore.
BitPay does. I've seen BitPay use it. I think Jeff Garzik did I think he worked for BitPay, if I'm not mistaken, a lot on like zero confirmation security, create flags, systems like that. But I mean, the zero confirmation security needs to be done on protocol levels on the actual blockchain, not on like higher level inheritances of that, like your own node, essentially.
Have you created anything that someone can pay with a credit card online and the funds are put into Nexus instantly?
No, I haven't, but I'm leaving that for other people to do. You know what I mean? I mean, like, decentralize everything. So, like, if I'm building everything, like, isn't that kind of a fail point?
The problem with that, right, is that chargebacks are pretty easy for customer. I mean, so first,
there wouldn't be a chargeback.
how could you not have a chargeback?
With a credit card, there's always the possibility of a chargeback.
Right, but the bank cannot go into a Nexus account or a Bitcoin account and pull the money back out.
It's the exchange that gets screwed.
Yeah, somebody will. I mean, then somebody in
Someone
the
has to
exchange,
get
everybody
the
gets
dollar,
stolen.
so dollar value, right? So since the credit card system only understands U.S. dollars, or at least, you know what I mean, dollars of different currencies, I guess. But it's just assume they can only understand dollars, so someone has to be holding the sack. There has to be someone there accepting the dollars. The bank won't do that though. So nobody's willing to do that because if the customer calls and says, "Hey, my card was stolen. You need to reverse those transactions," someone's now lost money, you know, so it...
Yeah, it's stealing from somebody, either in the exchange or the merchant or something, and that's part of the problem is Bitcoin's inherent security with the mining is very secure, but the problem is the scalability has forced people to reduce the security in order to provide a decent merchant experience, right? You know, you don't want to wait for like 10, 20 minutes for a confirmation. Those people want to pay and go. So, you know, if they're trying to get new people buying with Bitcoin, they're going to be driven to accept less secure transactions in order to keep up with the network flow. So that's kind of the problem, if you know what I mean. It's the security of Bitcoin is being compromised by its inability to scale. And segregated witness is addressing that in one respect, and it's also addressing the transaction malleability issue. But then again, a lot of people are like, this is totally not even Bitcoin. I mean, it's not even Satoshi's original code in it.
When you're saying scale, are you talking about the bottleneck or are you talking about the number of miners?
Oh, bottleneck. As far as transaction capacity, the number of miners is always going to definitely go up. I mean, that's just how it works. There's the arms race, and so they're getting smaller and smaller. ASICs are getting better and better and better. The security of the network and the mining industry is going up, yes, but think about it too. The protocol is a synchronous protocol. It handles messages one after another after another. So the more nodes you have, the longer it takes to propagate. You have more immutability that way, but it slows the whole network down. So the number of miners increases the security, but bottlenecks the network even more because the more nodes you have, the slower everything processes, the slower everything propagates. And then they get into the block size debates, which one of the big reasons the miners didn't want is something called the Great Firewall of China. It's kind of a joke. They have a massive IP filtering firewall that makes propagation a little slow from outside of China. So like getting a 1 megabyte block takes a bit of time, and it takes time to propagate, let alone if you have 3 transactions per second, right? It's going to have to be processing all of those. Let's say there's a huge transaction flood and a dust spam attack, right? It's going to have to process every one of those messages before it gets to a block. So the block may have arrived at the actual hardware level of the computer 5 seconds or 10 seconds before it actually gets recognized by the program, because it's got to process all these flooded out messages, which it's not multi-threaded, which computers can handle. I mean, 64 bits can handle 10,000 threads up to that. So even the socket level code hasn't really been redone. And I mean, this is something that you and me were talking about. And, you know, I was happy that you recognize that, because it's like, seriously, like their socket handlers listen for new connections, drop old connections that are timed out, read new data, write data. And it's all done on one thread, which means like everything coming in and out is simultaneous. Or, I mean, one after the other, sorry. When it should be multi-threaded. You could have, I mean, shouldn't blocks be propagated on their own protocol dedicated for block propagation, so that you don't have flood of transaction messages that you need to worry about? You just, this one solely handles blocks. This one solely handles transactions. This one solely handles version messages and pings and pongs and all those different things to keep the connections alive. And you can kind of specialize the protocols into different multi-threads that allows it to scale and process things simultaneously, which will increase the block propagation speed. And I talked to Jeff Garzik. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. I was actually going to work for Block, this company, back in January. Had a video interview with him and everything. Like, he was really impressed with some of the knowledge, so we were going to go. But like, I kind of just like overshot my salary for the amount that they could have. So, I mean, I figured it was good though, because more time for Nexus. But I mentioned to him about the lower level protocol which I developed, and utilizing that in Bitcoin and rebuilding some of the back end. He's like, oh, I'd love to rebuild some of the back end of Bitcoin, and And he actually was trying to put CubeSats up too. I don't know if you're familiar with that. BitSats, done vegan space systems. It never really took off. It didn't get the funding. But then fell into the lap with Vector Space Systems, which my father's affiliated with. He co-founded SpaceX. And now we're basically starting a CubeSat mesh network, but I have a nice connection with Jeff Garzik, which is the perfect way to push pull requests through into Bitcoin and maybe give Block some of that. Like, hey, here you go, Garzik. Do you want some of this technology? Here, you got your own specific, he calls it the Bitcoin router, is how he called it. Here you go, here's some technology you can utilize on your router to make your company have more visibility. We've already built it. Here's a proven track record. So I've developed a good relationship with him, which means like when some of this technology is mature enough, which means like it's battle hardened, got to put it out in the wild. You can have your own internal network. You'll never really know what can go wrong until you have all the adversaries attacking. And that's what I mean, I've had a lot of hacking. Like the last 3 months, we've had like tons of Chinese, Russian hackers, like a Russian hacker that was high on amphetamines too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he wouldn't sleep for 3 or 4 days, and he's taunting me in Slack and everything like that. But like, yeah, like, so I'm sitting here like keeping up with this Russian, like, you know, oh, das is good.
Did they hack the election or not?
Yeah.
I don't, dude, that's a bunch of horse shit, man. Oh my God, like, we don't even get into that. Yeah, like, oh, the media is behind Hillary the whole way.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Russians influence the election because they hate Hillary because she's a sociopath. But we'll leave that right.
I have a question. It was Hillary.
She hacked it on her private email server, right?
I have a question about the blocks. If the transactions in the blocks are separate, how do the blocks, you know, where's the link, right? Is there a link between, well, like currently in Bitcoin, right, the transactions are in the blocks, right? They just constitute a block. How would it work with your system if they're like separate?
That question actually introduces something very good. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. It's part of the architectural level. So I was talking about node roles. That's not elucidated in this specific writing here, but basically think about it like when a transaction goes out, right? When it's finished on the architectural level, you send the transaction out. Boom. And the transaction nodes all have trust with one another because they've said, okay, this is a valid transaction. Everybody agrees it's valid. It gets all the way to a block, so they build trust with their signature. So let's say you want 6 confirmations or 6 blocks on the transaction. You send the transaction out, the transaction nodes all ping that around to each other and say, cool, 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 we got this transaction, this is verified, we're not going to let another one in. Now if you do a Sybil attack, which is the adversarial size, like let's say I send 2 out at the same time, who the hell in their right mind is going to send 2 transactions out at the same time unless they're attacking? So all you do is you just like nullify both of them. You say, all right, well they're both invalidated. So somebody can't attack it that way. And so you get a lock. And so that'll be a transaction confirmed with the lock confirmed. Then the hash of that transaction then is going to be included in the staking, right? The staking nodes, which they're going to be working off of the time span based on the transaction capacity. If there's 50,000 or 10,000 transactions per second, you're going to probably want to have that many hashes in. So those are going to be the heavier blocks, right? But it's not going to really matter because there's not a whole lot of resource input, I mean, other than just your stake. So if you miss the block, you'll get one next, and you'll still get the same interest because it's based on the time, right? So hey, I don't get it now, I'll get my interest payment eventually. So those can be the heavy blocks, but instead of having the transaction in it, they reference it to the transaction nodes with their trust. And then they hold the hashes, right? And then they hash that together to create the Merkle hash. And then the Merkle hash can then be included into the block hash, and that'll be hashed into the Merkle tree. So then the miners will confirm it. So you'll have lock confirmed or transaction confirmed, which will be basically be 0 confirmation safe as far as I see it now. I mean, I can't make that projection just yet because it's not out in the wild and I haven't developed that far yet. But essentially, you'll have 3 different checks and balances of one another. Instead of the miners having the rule all dictatorship, but we have the say in the transactions, well, they need to reference a Merkle block, which needs to reference a transaction. So the transaction nodes hold the transactions, then the reference or the hash, TXID, is hashed together, and then the MID, or the Merkle ID, is then hashed into the block. And so you got 3 layers of security that check and balance one another, and one can't just do without the others. So that's part of the node roles, and that's how the organic scaling is going to be able to happen. So the lock should happen within 5 or 10 seconds. It will be done all on the protocol levels. You're not going to have the cost of the hash rate, which you can relatively see that's a lot more safe than a 0 confirmation Bitcoin transaction. Then the Merkles will group them together so that blocks don't have to be heavy. So I mean, let's say there's only, let's say it's set for each Merkle block is a group of every transaction of each second. So I mean, the maximum size, let's say it's been 60 seconds between blocks, would be 60 Merkle hashes. So I mean, it'd be a very, very small block. Like, I think I calculated 100, 200 kilobytes tops. So the blocks, I mean, fully loaded, full capacity. So the miners aren't going to have the problem with orphan blocks. The blocks are going to propagate faster, then they check and balance each other. And instead of storing all of it in a load, they all reference each other. But the problem is the trust. The trust hasn't been established. There's no trust. Bitcoin is not trustless anymore. That's, you have to know who to trust, what node to trust. All these adversaries could be doing this. This exchange, like Bitfinex, could steal my money and then make an altcoin or whatever. I mean, who knows if it was hacked or not. But I mean, $80 million in a hot wallet, I don't know. That's just my opinion. But so when you have a decentralized mathematical trust, we know we can trust each other based on the mathematics.
Can you use a Nexus as a buffer between Bitcoin and transactions?
Yeah, I mean, essentially you could. Like if you want to like move Bitcoin and Nexus on an exchange and then move Nexus around if you want to move the value from Bitcoin to make it faster. You'll have to do it on the exchange, obviously. And that's going to cause, you know, rises or falls. But yeah, I mean, it can be kind of an intermediary as well. It really just depends. But I'm hoping as it develops and this technology is proven, Bitcoin will be able to inherit some of these ideas and some of these different things. So, you know, the node roles and the decentralized trust can be validated by like, hey, this mining pool produces valid blocks. They don't release empty blocks. They produce this many. They have a track record. Now everybody can see their track record, and that track record is what is mathematically calculated into their trust score. So then people can be like, okay, what nodes do I want to talk to? Well, the ones that have the most trust because they have a series of honesty. And then you put the cost of an attack not just in money, but in time. That is the most precious commodity all of us have. You can't buy time, no matter how much money you have. So that's kind of part of how the trust system works. But also, the baseline of how the trust system works now is you get a higher interest rate based on how much trust you have. And you also get a higher staking capacity, so you get stake blocks a little more than frequently, I guess you could say, once your trust is fully loaded. So I'll show you right here, it actually grows on, that's just the block weighted equation. So your interest rate is based on that equation, like that. Now it may look like Greek to some, it may not to others, but It's a logarithmic equation, but here's the graph of it so you can see that's what your interest rate looks like. So it takes 1 year to get 3% interest, because it's like, well, you know,
1 year to get what?
3% interest. You start at 0.5%, and you have to constantly build your trust up in order to get a higher interest rate, which grows mathematically.
You're talking about the staking.
Yeah. And that's just, I mean, it's kind of the trust linked to this idea here, so I figured I'd just follow the flow. So this is your interest rate on your staking, which is proportional to the trust and time you input it. So, you know, I mean, one of the philosophies we always say, not everybody has money, but everybody's got time. So why don't we level the playing field like we talked about, give everyone equal opportunity? Well, if you want to utilize your time, you get rewarded. And so the trust should give you a reward, and it also gives you an ability to validate one another without having to know each other, without like having to go through human interaction to know if somebody's a good person or not. You see their track record. It's like your digital reputation, I guess you could say. And based on that digital reputation, then we can have a better idea of how to communicate with one another and who's more valid or less. So,
A stupid question. Does that mean that node or that person is now 3% more likely to get the next block?
no, that's right over here. Now that's based on the weight equation right there. So that's another logarithmic equation. I'll show you. That's how you get your stake. So it takes 30 days to get the highest likelihood to get the block, to get fully loaded trust. It takes 90 days to build up your trust in order to get your trust key set. So I mean, there's an initial conditioning period as well where you have to put your time into it to even get past that 0.5% interest or 0.5% interest rate. So that's kind of like, well, why are you going to screw your trust? Because you screw your trust. If you send out bad blocks, you screw your reputation up, you're going to lose your interest rate. You lose your interest rate, you lose money. So what's the point of it? Because the main point of an attack is to make money. So if you make the attack more expensive than it's profitable, people aren't going to want to do it. And that's part of the ways that you mitigate as far as security measures, I guess you could say, because nothing's secure. Hold on one second. Nothing's secure in a computer. It's just resistant to attack. Based on that algorithm, you know, the higher the cost, the lower the profit, the lower the attack. With Bitcoin, the cost of attacking the network is millions of dollars of money. So nobody's going to try to do it. Because they can't, or it's not worth it. Oh yeah, I'm not going to make $10 million on a double spend from doing a double spend, so what's the point? So, what did you say, sir?
So would that solve the problem of right now, I think what's happening is, I forget the name of the miner, it's not via BTC, but one of them is continually solving blocks with 0 transactions just to get the block.
Empty blocks.
Which one is it? Is it via BTC or is that a different one?
I think it was
And they're pissing people off, but
Yeah,
then
yeah.
again, it's still legitimate.
Well, yeah, but then they don't get orphaned, right? So what's the point in releasing empty blocks?
So in your system, would they get, like, as it were?
That's where the transaction nodes are going to help out, because here's how many transactions need to be processed, and if you're not processing them at your full capacity, then maybe your trust is going to be
You lose your
reduced.
trust and you get X'd out.
Well, I mean, not X'd out, but you lose your trust, you lose your weight, and you lose your ability to get blocks. So, I mean, I'm thinking with the mining trust, I'm developing that algorithm too. You'll get a percentage. So instead of an interest rate, your reward will go up to the max threshold based on your trust. So if you reduce your trust, your reward goes down, which disincentivizes you from releasing empty blocks. But you have to have the understanding of locked transactions that everybody knows happen in order to make assessments like that on the network. Right now, you know, the memory pools are not synchronized with one another. None of them are. And that's partially due to the protocol issues, right? So with that being the case, you need to know the transactions but have a mathematical verification to have a consensus that can be seen by everybody. Otherwise, you break the consensus mechanism and then you create what's called a fork. We've all heard about the forks. That's because nodes don't agree on the same rules. So right now, Bitcoin wouldn't be able to do that. Because they say, okay, well, there's this many transactions in this memory pool, this many in this one. How can we assess that this is accurate and this is accurate? They're all going to have different varying opinions of one another. So with the locks and the propagation of the transactions that way, then we have a solid baseline to work off of that everybody can agree on. And everybody agrees because that's what the transaction nodes say, because they've all agreed and had their consensus. And based on their trust is how you know how reputable their opinion is on, let's say, how many transactions have happened or how many need to be processed. And so by contacting different ones at different levels of trust, let's say you get to a certain threshold of trust, you say, I'm going to talk to 5 transaction nodes. ask them all about this transaction if it happened. And based on, if they all have enough trust waiting together, you build yourself to a threshold that you decide, okay, well, I'm only going to accept that this is a valid transaction with this amount of threshold of trust. And so that kind of gives it an ability, like, it uses the trust as a way to give people incentive, but it also is a way for us to create these node rules, because otherwise any asshole could just make a transaction node and then start saying, well, yeah, these transactions happen, and then do their civil attacks is what it's called. The civil attack is like pretending to be something else, like and flooding the network with multiple nodes and trying to control it. But then every node you put out is going to have to create a trust, which means you're going to have the time of every node to create. And so to attack the trust system is going to require a hell of a lot of time and a hell of a lot of computers. And it's just, why would you want to do it? Well, I mean, if you can make this much money, but how much can you really make?
Time is money.
Cool. All right, move forward. Another one?
So I'm not sure if I got the whole thing, but the 3% is really for the miners?
No, the 3% right now, that's on the proof of stake system. So if you think about it, I mean, inflation should go to people that are going to use it properly, instead of it going to people that are just like the banks. I mean, the inflation in the U.S. economy is being taken from us. I mean, it's basically a hidden tax. So why not give to people that are contributing in other forms? So right now that's the stakers, but I'm developing the trust system into the miners as well. So every miner is going to have their own trust key, and they're going to have a reputation based on the blocks they produce, their track record. And when they get to a certain threshold of trust, that's when they get full rewards. So when a person starts mining, they'll take them a little bit to build that up. So that's going to disincentivize people just hopping on and off, changing around, you know what I mean?
And does that come related to the reward pool that you were showing me? Like there's when the blockchain's running, there's like a certain pool of money available for the reward?
That's the reserves.
Oh, that's the reserves, I mean.
So that's what's really nice about the reserve system. I'll show you that in a second. So as you can see right here, see, now that's a proof of stake, so that doesn't have reserve. So that's another thing. Supply generation on Nexus is precise. It's exact to the second. It means every second, instead of block reward halving, it's a slow decay. But the reward is based off of how much is in the reserves. So if the reserves are really full, then your reward is going to get bigger, so that you can start reducing the amount that's in the reserves. Now when the reserves get depleted, which would be from like a miner with a huge hash power coming and popping off a bunch of blocks. In Bitcoin, they're just going to pop off 12.5 Bitcoin blocks right in a row. Bam, 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 bam. Now that's the actual supply of Bitcoin's not going to be affected, but the amount of supply at the time is going to be affected. That's going to create an inflation faster than what it should have been. So it's impossible for that. Like at launch day when I said everybody flooded the network, right? There's a lot of things called instant mining. Dash had a really bad name for that because the difficulty failed, because the difficulty algorithm is what regulates the supply generation. Now with Nexus, what happened is there was a first deposit into reserves, miners started popping out blocks, and their rewards were actually one Nexus, about, until the reserves filled up because the block time slowed down. And once the block time slowed down, more filled in the reserves, and the rewards started going up to the maximum threshold that they could be at. So that's another cool thing, because I launched the GPU channel 1 month after I launched the CPU channel. With that very first GPU block, released 1 month's worth of Nexus that should have been produced by that channel, which is exactly 50% into the reserves. And then it took about 2 to 3 months for the miners to eat out that reserve. It was about 1 million, I think. And they ate it out, did it up, and then got it down to zero. So it allows you to basically have a balanced system that is time determinant instead of just based on difficulty. It's kind of a secondary, and it's also a fingerprint, because every reward has to be a specific amount to the decimal. And that's calculated with radioactive decay equations. E to the negative t, kt is what it is. So it's just a slow decay every minute, which reduces shock on the market. I mean, because one of the reasons I built that is I've been a miner. And I've been mining a coin, and then all of a sudden, reward halves. And then there goes half my profits. And I'm like making $100 a day, and now I'm making 50 a day. And I'm like, what the fuck? Yeah. You know, I mean, it's like, it's kind of, that way block reward halving is mimicking what a half-life would be considered in radioactive decay equations. You've heard of that. You know, carbon-14 decays, a half-life, that's how we do carbon dating, you know, because it's cutting it in half. So it's a logarithmic decrease, but I just kind of did fill in between instead of being like, churn, churn, churn. It's just a nice curve.
Well, and maybe if you could step back for a second, because I'm not sure, and just explain, like, from a higher level, the mining channels, right? The GPU, CPU, and
yeah.
Yeah,
good question. So the three channels, right? They all have their own difficulty. They all have their own supply, so they're cut 50-50. And they create what's called the trust in the chain. So Nexus isn't based on the longest chain wins. It's based on the most trusted chain wins. Which means if, let's say, there's a CPU block and you make another CPU block with a previous CPU block referencing it with your previous block hash, that's going to have less trust than a CPU or a GPU block or a proof of stake block. Because somebody, let's say, with 51% of the CPU power could make 6 blocks in a row, but that's actually going to require them to make 18 in a row. They're going to have to make 3 times the length to cover the trust of the regular chain. The chain is based on that, so it creates, how should I say it, higher resistance to 51% attacks, because you have to hijack the CPU channel, the GPU channel, and the proof of stake channel, and you have to stagger them one after the other, and make sure you produce them in a perfect chain to create the highest trust, which creates a much higher cost for an attack as far as 51% is concerned.
So, if you were to compare Bitcoin mining to Nexus mining, what's the earning capabilities, what's the difference in the mining capabilities for the miner?
How much is being made per day? Or what type of...
Yeah, I don't know. You tell me, what...
I guess I'm missing some of the specifics of that question. Can you elaborate on it a little bit?
Well, rinse it out and shoot the water. I think it's 12.5 Bitcoins that you can earn by processing so many transactions.
All right. So here, I'll just go over here so I can see that I have too much computer time. I have bad eyesight sometimes. So right now there is 21.59899 Nexus being produced per minute, which is about 62 cents a minute coming into the economy. An hour, it's $1,295.907, which is about $40 an hour. There's 31,083.51 per day. And now this changes every day. Now here's the total supply, 44,969,260. Chain is 812 days old. The inflation rate right now is 0.49%. You can calculate that perfectly since the supply generation is locked to the minute. We know in exactly 1 year there's going to be the 9,185,560 Nexus created. And that is...
What's the per day earnings?
Per day right now is about 31,083.51. And that's exact.
Dollars per day.
Well, not dollars.
In equivalent dollars per day.
$900 a day. That's about like the size of the mining industry right now. So about $900,000 a day, depending on the market.
Where the market cap is over $1 million, a little over $1 million?
1.293467 million. Yep. 1.3 million. Now, here I'll show you this too. So that's what's cool. This is just compounding the equation, right? Because I tested it a lot. I did like weeks of just like, okay, well, this is the projected supply I want after exactly 1 week. And I created the algorithm, and it took me a few different times to make it right when I was building it and testing it. But I got it down to like, this is like, there's no way to sway from this mathematical course. And that's part of where unified time comes in as a security model, is I'm basing a lot of these things off of that. Now here, the unified timestamp right here, the Unix time is 148.169.0691, which is the number of seconds since 1970. That's the network-wide time, so the whole network knows that time. It sees that on the same clock. The chain height is 1,097 blocks. There's 103 connections on this node. Now, reserves in the prime channel is 274 right now. The current block reward value based on that reserve is 18.51. Now, the hash difficulty right now is 206. Sorry, the prime difficulty is 6.3. The reserves on the hashing is about 225. That's about what it should be. And the hashing value is 18.51259,100. And that's the value of the current block.
I assume you're doing some mining also.
Me? Sometimes. I mean, like, honestly, it's way above what my computers are capable of. I mean, I generally don't use super high-powered computers because I personally believe it makes... I have one. But, I mean, I kind of use the computer. That's, like, my main rig. I mean, the way I see it is fast computers make lazy programmers. Because, hey, if it runs fast, well, you don't even know how slow it can be. So I use super slow computers so that it makes me a better programmer. I have to optimize it to the maximum.
Also, since you're using proof of stake, the more Nexus you have on your computer, the more you're going to generate when you're staking, So that encourages people to hang on to their Nexus instead of just buying and selling and flipping it.
Exactly, and then with the variable interest rate, that encourages people to continue staking and hold their Nexus to get to that higher value. So the inflation rewards you in some respects, but it also keeps some of it off the market to help keep the economy growing that way instead of people always liquidating. I mean, liquidity is good here and there, but it's also good to have people holding. And right now, if you're holding Bitcoin, you don't get anything. Nothing. There's nothing rewarding you for holding
Getting into Bitcoin, the higher the price of Bitcoin goes.
That's part of it,
That's
yes.
the interest.
You're right. The market.
Is your formula different?
Well, yeah, it's an actual interest that's generated on your coin, so you get deposits into your wallet every time you get a trust wallet. And that also is increasing your trust and increasing your interest rate. So you get up to 3% of your holdings if you continue to stake for 1 year.
Is that per 3% per day or per year or per what?
Yearly.
Per year.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to make that decay logarithmically as it gets larger because, I mean, as the supply gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, I'm going to have to tie it to the supply to make the interest rate go down. As the supply gets bigger, right now 3% is fine because it's still a small economy, but I mean, when we're talking billions, trillions, like, I mean, that's a really large amount of money coming in, but it's also good because it keeps money flowing in to the economy, and as money keeps flowing in, it grows gradually. Inflationary currencies have their benefits, but I think inflation, if it goes to the people in the people's hands, rather than being taken from us, it actually stimulates the economy slightly as long as it's not too high.
How can you compete at 3% with Bitcoin when Bitcoin in a year makes 120%?
Well, because Nexus has gone up 2,000% in the last year, so along with your interest and the market, I mean, it's a dual thing. So Bitcoin, yeah, you get capital gains, but you get the same thing with Nexus. It's based on a free market and the same principles. So you get capital gains as well as you get your interest. So it's kind of like a decentralized interest mechanism. Yes, sir.
I think we're confusing inflation with appreciation. So you talked about inflation to the miners that have trust, that build trust over time. What's stopping a lot of miners over time getting a lot of trust and getting a lot of inflation? And you say, you mentioned earlier, when it gets too big, you'll dial it back.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
What stops you from just manipulating the whole system? That's
me?
I mean,
well, I mean, what would stop me? Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I mean, what would stop somebody from manipulating the whole system is partially the supply generation. We know exactly how much is going to come out. And the second is our inflation rate, which you can monitor right here, which is going to be the total global inflation. So, I mean, I might make a protocol rule about that in the future, so that as the inflation rate will still increase to a maximum of, like, you know, proportionality 6-fold, but as there's more supply and the miners are producing more, and the supply, you know, continues to grow and grow and grow, it should be reduced slightly, the inflation rate, so that it can maintain, I'd say, like, I mean, you got $1 trillion economy, it probably would only need to be 0.1, 0.2%, which, like, when it's worth hundreds of dollars in Nexus, that's a lot of money. But right now, since the economy is still small, you know, the profits are smaller for this amount of inflation. And since there's a small supply, 3% annual inflation isn't a huge deal. But you get a larger supply, 100 million, 200 million, that's going to compound. And compounding, we've got to counter the compounding interest with kind of a general growth, the way that it's going now. But as you have more supply, we've got to reduce that interest rate and kind of work against that compounding.
So just to be clear, you mean a decrease in the increase of coins rather than the appreciation?
Yeah, well, the appreciation happens on the market. That's out of my hands. I'm talking about something to just keep the incentive, because, I mean, as it appreciates in time, you're going to make more money, let's say 5 years from now with 3% than you would now. But then again, you know, the more that it keeps compounding, you know, compound interest, it's going to grow exponentially, and we don't want that. We want to reduce that exponential growth, but still allow that incentive where you make your money from staking and running a computer, where when it's hundreds of dollars in Nexus, you'll be making, hey, who knows, you can be making $100 a day just from staking. But it should stay kind of a dollar value. You can't tie it to a dollar value as far as the consensus protocol. You know, but it's going to just have to be kind of a projection based on the supply generation. That's something I'm still working at as far as how those equations are going to work. But part of it is also, like, you come up with these ideas, but one idea leads to the next, and then it leads to 10 more. And then 10 people do this or that, and you see these flaws, and you slowly grow it and change it. So that's just part of the growth and the change, and that's something that I'd want to be decided by everybody, essentially. Yes, sir.
Where does the 3% come from? Is it from transaction fees, or is it from like a reserve that's
It's
just
minted.
It's minted, so it's like
Right.
That's pure inflation.
Yeah, pure inflation. Yeah. And so that allows us to not have any transaction fees, which is going to be good for people, right? Because I mean, I predict like when the Bitcoin mining reduces down to a very small minimum, it's going to create a huge fee market where it could cost you hundreds of dollars to set a Bitcoin. So the transaction fees is a decent idea, but the deflationary concept of Bitcoin is actually going to work counter to it in the future. Now, out of control inflation, that's a big problem. But slight inflation stimulates an economy. Right now, we have massive inflation that's so terrible, like the value of the dollar cuts in half every 20 years, and it's probably even faster, let alone all the other principles that they use for the monetary system. So this is something designed as a decentralized way to give people that, but also stimulate the economy and also give people the opportunity to free transactions. So instead of the transaction fee coming from each individual, it comes out of the whole network, essentially, equally. Everybody has an equal use. The equal cost of the use is the inflation, but you get a piece of that cost too. So it goes to everybody's pockets, but it also comes from everybody as well, if you understand. Because, I mean, as it inflates slightly, the price is going to reduce if the inflation gets higher, because that's just the concept of money and the value. And, you know, if you're increasing the supply, the demand stays the same, it's going to reduce the price or the valuation of it slightly. So, you know, and that reduction of the cost, that creates a global transaction fee. That could be a yearly reduction, however we decide our interest rate to be. But that also goes in everybody's pockets that decides to build a trust key and a stake and to hold their coins.
There's being a limited amount, at some point that interest will shut off, whether, you know, however many.
Yeah, and that's up to the people. You know, that's up to the network. Like, you know, we agreed on 3% because we thought that was a fair number. I went and I asked, like, do you guys want E to the X or ln of X? And they're just like, ln of X is a good equation. And that's why I derived that equation. I go to the community and I'll be like, hey guys, what do you think? And they'll be like, I like this, I don't like that. And then I go and say, like, giving to people like Morpheus or, you know, you just go and you say, hey, what's some features that you think we should have? Like, what is something that you would want Bitcoin to be that you can't reach right now? Because right now, we can't go to the Bitcoin developers and be like, we'd like to have this feature. Gonna be like piss off. We're like, we're already big shots. Like, we can't even
figure out the block size.
Oh yeah. We can't even ask for a block increase. Like, so in a sense, like, Bitcoin is decentralized, but it's kind of become, I call it a decentralized dictatorship. In a way, the miners are the dictators. Same with the exchanges, the main exchanges, and same with the coin developers. So ways we can mitigate that is through the decentralized trust, the decentralized voting. So, like, let's say in the future when Nexus is millions of people, you know, with the different voting groups, like we'll get to in a minute, that'll allow people to say, hey, I want this feature. Bam. It goes out, it's mathematically validated, and I mean, eventually I'd want it to be able to actually lock in a protocol change just by a vote. So you say, hey, we want to change the interest rate to 3% or 2% or 1%, everybody agrees on it and validates it, and that becomes a consensus rule. It won't even require somebody to type the upline. People should be able to just do it that way, but that's very futuristic, and that's going to take a lot of time to get to there, but it should be fully autonomous, where we can create our own currency together by what we choose as a consensus.
So what happens to the dissenters in that scenario? Like, what's your thought? The people who don't, who disagree with the vote, do they set up a new chain, or do they just?
I mean, I really couldn't tell you yet.
I'm just like,
I could have predictions. I mean, I could just summarize that simply in saying, like, from the Big Lebowski, sometimes you eat the bar and sometimes the bar eats you. So sometimes we get our way, sometimes we don't. But when it's everybody, sometimes we gotta make some sacrifices and we don't get everything we want all the time. But sometimes you get yourself. But really it comes down to, like, what everybody decides. And so, you know, if there's something that you find more appealing, let's say you can put a petition out for a change and it doesn't get validated, well, you get smarter about how you do it. You come up with valuable ideas that everybody's gonna find valuable. And then that's what's going to get it passed. Now, it may sometimes just be a weak idea, so your way doesn't get. Anything else? Yes, sir.
How does someone buy Nexus without mining?
Well, right now we're on Bittrex and Cryptopia. So you got to use Bitcoin right now because we're still small. So we're traded directly to Bitcoin. But yeah, you can go to Bittrex Exchange. You can see us on CoinMarketCap. We're a top 100. I think we hang around from 50 to 70. It's really volatile right now because it's illiquid. which goes both ways. You know, I mean, it's illiquid on the buy side, but it's hell of illiquid on the sell side. I mean, Morpheus and I were calculating the other day, what, 180 bitcoins to $1.50 in trade volume. That's how few people are selling, because the community has been created organically and very strongly. So, you know, as more people come in, I mean, you know, $1 million in trade volume is nothing for crypto. I mean, 180 bitcoins is chump change to some whales, right? I mean, if a whale came in, they could drive the price to $10 like that, because nobody's selling. So it's illiquid, but you know, it comes with its benefits and its drawbacks. But the community is very strong. We have a lot of strong holders, so you don't really have too many people liquidating, unless some new people. But then the reoccurring psychological effect is, let's say I dump it to 2,000 Satoshi, right? And then I'm like, oh, rage quit, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, some news comes out, and we blow through to 5,000 Satoshi. Gonna be like, damn it, I feel like Laszlo right now. I shouldn't have sold. I shouldn't have licked. And then next time they buy, I know what's going to happen. It's going to go up. And then that creates stronger holders and stronger holders, which creates a growing market cap. It's kind of happened with Bitcoin. People that sold at $200, they're like, damn, that was stupid. Now we're close to 800 right now.
If Bitcoin adopted your technology, if they wanted to integrate it with the stakeholders for Nexus, would that be converted?
Well, I mean, think about it like one of the initial sentiments I stated is providing outer world utility, which, you know, could be also the Bitcoin economy. So when has an alternative currency ever produced technology that Bitcoin has adopted? Never. So imagine what that's going to do to the market. When people find a value in Nexus, contributing value to Bitcoin, that's going to go right back into the market, which is going to cause a price to increase. So it does go to every holder that holds Nexus, because them holding it and the capital gains that come from the value that's contributed to Bitcoin and the publicity that comes with that, which comes with the trade volume, which increases the liquidity, increases the buy volume, drives the price up. You guys all make money from that value because you put value into holding it. You put value into buying it. You put value into your ideas and listening, talking about it. And with it putting value into Bitcoin, people are going to be like, wow, this is like the first one that's not trying to defeat Bitcoin. All these alternative currencies are like, we're going to overtake Bitcoin. We're going to be bigger than Bitcoin, like all the Ethereum guys. Oh yeah, it's going to be bigger than Bitcoin. It's a new Bitcoin. It's like, you know, I compare Bitcoin as kind of like a tube, a vacuum tube, right? I mean, it has a lot of utility in this world. It's vintage amplifiers. We love tube amplifiers. It has certain applications in certain areas. We're working on the transistor, but one shouldn't be exclusive to another. They just have their own utilities and their own uses, and that's kind of what we're approaching. But some of the utilities of us developing the transistor can go back onto the technology to make the tube better, if you understand. Yes, sir.
Do you have any plans to create an app so that we can use Nexus?
On your phone?
On your phone?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's something though I'm hoping other people will take. I'm more of like the lower level guy. I mean, this is like what I look at while I'm coding. This is how I see people attack the network. I mean, I wonder if somebody will get to the show. I see people do double spend attacks all the time and try to attack, and I'm just like, oh, yep. Oh yeah, we had people attacking the time system. I had somebody doing DOS attacks, different things like that. Right now it's pretty slow. Like, I ain't seen, you see flood attacks too? Like I think right when I first started talking, I don't know if you guys saw all the person messages. Somebody was flooding and trying to overload the socket handler to slow the network down to pound it. Like ever since the day we launched, I mean, we were like, we're super secure, blah, blah, blah. I had somebody try to 51% attack the network the very first day of launch. I was watching him build his own blockchain, trying to overwrite it, and I'm just like, wait until the checkpoints kicked in, and then I watched him, and I'm like, fail! And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to deal. I just wanted to show you, like, you can't do it. Now I'm going to ban your ass. And then I put, you know, then I activated the DOS bans for that specific net, and kicked him off, and I saw him try, like, 3 more different attacks over the next week. You know, I banned him every time, and then I banned him for a whole day, so that I made them really slow in their attack and also added a lot of cost to it. Well, DOS
do that manually.
So when somebody has a consensus issue where they're trying to create a chain, it's really easy to see in the protocol level. So if somebody violates a rule of the protocol, you do a DOS ban which locks them from connecting to this node and the internal network and some of the seed nodes, and then that propagates to other people that block them, and then they can't access the network for one day.
That's a unilateral ban. You decide to ban it, and it gets.
No, the protocol decides to ban it, and other people that use that update decide to utilize that. Now, there's DOS banning in there already if you violate certain consensus rules. You know, like if you try to send something out that's not from a previous checkpoint, you get DOS banned for a day. if you try to send out something that violates other rules of the network, let's say you have a different mining reward than what is mathematically calculated, because you're trying to manipulate the reward system, you get banned from it. That's something that was already built in. But I've enhanced that too with the lower level protocol, which that's a whole other story.
I just said a couple. If I could,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. One, that there are, correct me if I'm wrong, there are Windows, Mac, and Linux wallets for Nexus already. So just they're Qt wallets already downloadable, right, from the nexus.com. But there's not a phone one, right? And then, can you explain a little bit more the decentralized checkpoints?
Yeah, so it's really simple. Now, the only other type of automated checkpointing system is developed by Peercoin. Sunny King developed it, which requires a master node, basically, to broadcast a checkpoint to the whole network through the protocol. Which, just think about it as like the computers have to talk to each other to know the checkpoint. Now, Bitcoin right now, they're all hard-coded, which means they update the checkpoints every time they set out an update, right? And now Nexus is based on a time span. So it's a 1-hour checkpoint. So when there's a new time span, which means, let's say it's been 3,600 seconds since the last block. The first block to go over that 3,600 second threshold is going to be the block that is set for the new pending checkpoint. And then the previous one that was set for pending an hour ago is then hardened. So it gives an hour for them to discover, but it doesn't require them to communicate with one another about the checkpoints because they're already communicating about the blocks. All you have to do is just lock it in and say, well, this goes on this time span. Everybody knows the timestamp of all these blocks, so we don't need to talk to each other. So everybody just mutually agrees on it because of the blockchain, and then it locks that up so that nobody can do any overrides. You can't write a block that's not descendant from the most recent part of the checkpoint, which is kind of what the process of the checkpointing system in Bitcoin is to prevent people overriding the chain. So there is no possible way, even with 100% of the hashing power of the whole network, to override the chain past 1 hour. And that happens every hour, on the hour. You'll see it right, I don't know if it's, yeah, pending checkpoint right there. So the age of this last checkpoint is 3,247 seconds. So in about another 400 seconds, which is a little less than 10 minutes, a new one is going to be hardened, and then a new pending checkpoint is going to be set. So you can see it. I don't know if you guys can see it from out there. I use different symbols to show each different part of the feature so I can monitor it. But that's a pending checkpoint right now. It's off of height 109.7832. Current height is 109.7887. And then that one's going to be hardened, and then the blockchain then is therefore immutable past that point, even with 100% of the hash rate.
On another note,
Sorry.
how did you decide to come up with 85 million Nexus coins? And let me
I'm
talk
listening.
about Ethereum. They came up with 80 million. What is
78.
it? 78 million ethers. But then, after further investigation, you find out that Ethereum can produce as many ethers as they want.
Yep.
It's non-stop,
Yep.
so it's infinite.
Pretty much.
And that's why their stock has gone from $11 from a few months ago and dropped.
Also, their fork drama. You know, where they have the fork parties, and then they're like, we are immutable contracts, and then they'll be like, oh, by the way, we're, you know, saving our own ass and our own investment here, so we're gonna like overwrite that, and then it created, ever since Ethereum Classic, I think that's a big reason. I watched the market peak almost at 20, I believe. It was close to 1.5 billion. Ever since the Dow.
So my question is sort of two-part. Where did you come up with the 85 million, and you increase that whenever you want?
No, I mean, I don't have the power to do that. I can suggest that in an update, but everybody has to update. And everybody has to come to a threshold. A number of blocks have to hit with a certain, what's called, by a certain timestamp, which I call the activation timestamps. Instead of a block number being an activation like Bitcoin is, I do it at this exact time. So you know, this is going to happen exactly at noon on this day of this date of this year. Exactly. And once it hits that, then every version block that's before that is then therefore rejected. I think I gave it a 1 hour of leeway, just because like sometimes the miners get stuck. But how I chose the number 78 million is, I thought, you know, some people, they like to have a lot of things, but if you have too much of something like Dogecoin, it's like this is worthless. So it's something that's about 4 times the amount of Bitcoin
Right.
to have like more of that psychological effect. Like, hey, I got more of this. And I mean, it's a little, you know, I mean, plus the way I see it too is like getting in a mill of Bitcoins,
The
micro
economy of
Bitcoins.
scale in the valuation of the coin is 4 times lower than Bitcoin because there's 4 times as many coins.
In a market, yes. But I mean, it's the same market capitalization if you look at it in retrospect. I mean, if Bitcoin had 4 times as many Bitcoins, it'd probably be worth $200. But that'd still be a $12.5 billion market cap, which is how much money's in it. So I mean, it really balances out. But like, I thought it should be a little bit more than just 21 million like Bitcoin stakes. You know, it should. I like the number about 100 million. So it's 78 million after a year, but it takes like, I think close to 40 years to get here. Let me show you the supply graph so you can see it. But yeah, I mean, that's really the reason I made it, because exactly what I said, people like to have a lot of things, but if you have too much of something, then it's going to be worth nothing, like Doge. But another effect too, which is interesting, is you have a larger supply, right? So if, let's say, it goes up 10 Satoshi, it's going to increase in market cap 4 times as much than if there was 1/4 of the supply. So little price increments actually multiply the market cap faster, if you understand. Think about it like, okay, 10 Satoshi for 10 million, right? An increase of 10 million with 10 Satoshi increase is going to be, you know, 100 million Satoshi, right? Increase as far as the market cap. Now if you have 4 times that, let's say 49, and that's going to be 400 million increase for a 10 Satoshi increase in price. So smaller changes in the price actually do larger changes in the market cap.
How did you make that formula so that?
Well, I mean, honestly, that was something I just stumbled upon. I started thinking, I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, little price increments are actually going to multiply the market cap even more. But then if you have something that's so huge like Doge, which I don't know is traded around like sub 100 Satoshis, you know what I mean? Then like to break 1 Satoshi change is going to be like astronomical differences in price, you know, because of massive supply. So you need to have a balance between the two. But I think Bitcoin supply is a little too low comparative.
Was it divisible to the same 8 digits?
Yeah, it's
okay. I was gonna
10
say,
million. 10 million is the size of 1 Satoshi in Nexus. So it's got,
I was gonna say, the number doesn't.
7, 8, yeah.
If it's divisible up to a different number of digits, then it's apples and oranges. You're 21 million to 78 million. In your case, if it's the same, then it's.
Yeah, so I mean, we can just break it up into like smaller fractions, you know what I mean? And you look at Bitcoin when it gets really, 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 really big, right? And you start breaking into like 1 Satoshi is the minimum. What if 1 Satoshi is 10 cents?
Exactly.
You can't have pennies. So it's kind of a nice
total
thing
number's
to,
not entirely
plus,
insignificant, but it's somewhat
people
insignificant.
like are used to seeing, I have $1, I have $10, I have 10 Satoshi or 10 micro Satoshi or whatever. So that's part of it. Part of what I want is the supply to increase along with the adoption, so that the market cap increases at the same time, but it doesn't mar the market. It doesn't slow the market down. It doesn't create negative inflation, but it increases the supply with the increase in demand and people using it. So eventually you can have 1 or 2, 3 Nexus. It's, you know, I mean, comparable to $1, $2, $3, instead of having these gross, massive sizes of, you know, $800 in Bitcoin. Yeah, that's really great. But you know, I mean, if there was 800 times more Bitcoins than there are right now, and it was at $1 a Bitcoin, it would be a little bit easier for people to adopt and understand. Because when you start having to break into the math and the digits, then you start getting into the nerds like us, which we love it, but like not everybody really understands it.
Is Nexus an anonymous coin?
No, I don't believe in the anonymity because, for one, it fuels the dark markets, but I'm thinking in the future...
Are there regulatory forces that have contacted you to give behind-the-scenes transactions to them?
No, and I never would. I'd say, like, go on the blockchain and look it up yourself. I mean, there's something called rake signatures, which Shadowcoin is working on, right? What I want to do is give people the ability to express themselves to the greatest ability through the system. So eventually I'm thinking of having an anonymous transaction you can put out, but one thing that I'm developing in the future is two-way signatures, which means in order to receive Nexus or for it to be transferred, sorry, lost my train of thought. In order for it to be verified, it has to be signed by the receiver too, and that'll prevent them from ever be burning. or ever being burned. But the cool thing about that too is that gives you the choice to reject a transaction right now. Let's say you get $100 million in terrorist funding or whatever, you know, drug money sent to your account just because they want to like move it here, move it there, or whatever. Then you're liable. So shouldn't we have the ability to reject transactions we don't want, which then with the anonymity, you can reject anonymous transactions if you don't want to do the anonymous, or you can accept them if you want. And that gives people more of the ability. But I saw it kind of mars the adoption because the regulatory forces are going to find anything they can to beat us down and to say that we're a fucking dark market coin, or you're this, or you're that, because they don't want us to exist, because we are defeating their system by creating something better. So in a way, having the blockchain public and they can trace it through, they don't have a bat to beat us with. Anonymous transactions kind of are like giving a bat to beat them with. I don't think their cryptos are ready yet for fully anonymous, but that's just my personal opinion.
Well, you know, everyone in Congress has a Swiss bank account, and that's private, secret, and anonymous. Right?
But we already know the hypocrisy. You know, I mean,
so
they want to have their cake and eat it too.
If someone wants to have an anonymous account with Nexus, why couldn't they?
Well, that's what I'm saying. In the future, they will when it's developed. But right now, as we're getting accepted into the world and accepted by authorities, if you give them something to beat you with right off the bat, it's going to reduce your ability to bring it to the world. People are like, oh, isn't that used for drugs? Well, yeah, if it's anonymous, people probably will. But once we're set in the regulation, once they have their whole little thing, then you can be like, hey, here's the anonymous feature,
well,
something like
if
that.
If it's not anonymous, then it's trackable by regulatories.
Well, it's
that's
still
precisely what I'm saying. It's pseudo-anonymous,
just
like Bitcoin. It's not
Bitcoin,
like,
basically.
it's not like your name. I mean, it's pseudo-anonymous, so they have to trace the addresses through, right? So it functions the same way as Bitcoin, where you got the public ledger, but you don't know who owns what address. So they can still trace it through, but giving them that ability now prevents them from saying, this is drug money and we're making it illegal in our country, which, when you do that, we reduce our ability to adopt. So once it becomes I'll get to it in a second. Once it becomes well adopted enough where they've got their whole regulatory whatever, and it's big enough and worldwide, and how should I say, the engine's turning, the momentum's like billions of people or millions of people know about it, then you can drop something like that, because then they're not going to have some regulatory hammer to beat us.
That regulation is all about taxation.
Exactly. You know how you can flood
They want to track every transaction to tax you.
Exactly. Well, that's why you deal with certain people that you can do it in cash, which is the same way, which isn't traceable. So there's ways to do it just like Bitcoin right now. But as far as fully anonymous transactions, that's going to, in my opinion, attract people that are going to want not just tax havens, but hey, they want to pay for illicit goods or whatever else. But if we try to fight the laws too quickly, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. We've got to kind of work with them until we get big enough to be able to start calling the shots. But until then, while we're small, it's like they come down with something and they can destroy it. Really simply, they've already tried to do that with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin was fully anonymous, you know, with the Silk Road and everything, I think it would have created a lot of reduction in its ability to grow. Because, I mean, even Russia's tried to make it illegal. I think they finally legalized it again. They hate it. They hate it. So why are we going to give them weapons to beat us with right now when we can do our own pseudo-anonymity? And then when the time is right, we can release something full like that. But I just don't ever see something fully anonymous from launch right now being successful, because, like I said, we give them a bat to beat us with.
All you got to do is basically have rotating addresses, and that cures.
You can
I mean,
or you sell it for
knock
Bitcoin
yourself
and then
out.
buy it for Bitcoin and then withdraw it, you know, and then you got completely different Nexus from somebody else. I mean, that's a great way. There's ways to do it if you know how to do it. It works like Bitcoin, but you know, I mean, if we say, hey, we're anonymous here, you know, I mean, what are they going to say? Well, hey, we want your tax dollars. Oh, now you're publicly soliciting that you're anonymous. So what are you about? Now we have a weapon against you that we can use to manipulate the general public to believe this is something that it isn't, so that we can keep it from growing. That's how I see that. Let's see.
You want to talk about the voting too, because you have the voting.
Yeah, there's so much. Like I didn't even expect it to go this long. Yeah, there's still way more, like the lower level database and protocol and the lower level library. But I mean, I'll get to the voting. But I think he had a question. This is good for the interaction, so we all can. I mean, you guys are bringing different things up. Morpheus
You said the
answer?
only way to acquire it without mining is one of the wallets and exchangeable for Bitcoin. So if you had Bitcoin,
Yeah.
exchanged it for Nexus, that would reduce.
Or you can buy it for cash too.
Or I'll sell it.
That would
I mean, like
remove
Morpheus has been selling it around Phoenix. He's been bringing a lot of people. That's actually how I met you.
So that's anonymity.
Right? That's how I'm here is because of Morpheus. Actually, you know, networking around and like you can peddle it for cash. You can buy Bitcoin for cash. Buy it on the market if you want.
So that's
or-
anonymity then, right?
I mean, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. If you know how to do it, you can make it that way. But if we advertise it as anonymous,
All right.
then that gives them something that they can use and manipulate the public against us, which is something that we don't really want. That's going to harm everybody in some senses. So that's why I'm kind of not against, or I'm not for entirely anonymous transactions yet. But eventually, privacy is a very good thing. But if we try to jump that gun right now, we shoot ourselves in the
You
foot.
also have to, you can only focus on so many things. Like you're very security focused with a lot of these things.
Security and
the micro channels
efficiency
and the
and
checkpoints
speed,
and all
yeah.
the stuff you're doing.